Hey, this is Nick, the Mining Book Guy. Today we're going to talk about West African gold, a subject that's near and dear to me as I have made personal bets with my money in what I consider to be one of the most contrarian regions of the world for mining, but also one of the best opportunities. I am just an individual speculator, and I hope that this video is useful for you whether you're completely new to mining or you've got plenty of experience but you maybe haven't taken as close of a look at West Africa as you should have. And before I get into it, I want to mention that you should take a look at ceo.ca. I'll have a link up. If you are watching at my YouTube channel right now, there will be tons of additional resources for you to look at. Great question to start. Why the heck am I looking at West Africa for gold over all these other parts of the world? Well, without going into too much detail, Canadians, Americans, and Australians, they tend to first look in their own backyards. And if they're not looking in their own backyards, they tend to, at least the Canadians and Americans tend to think that Latin America is like, the one big place you should look. I don't want to discount at all that there's great opportunities in Latin America and they're developing all the time. But I will absolutely say, whether you're an individual investor, you're an analyst, you're an institution, or you're a newsletter writer, there's just way too much focus, whether it's all of North and South America or Australia. Europeans, whether it's British or mainland, they're more open to Africa. Africa is a very diverse place. And even though Europeans are interested, they don't make up for the lack of interest from everyone else. And so let's jump into some presentations. So this first one is by Endeavour Mining. Full disclosure, I do own shares, but I'm not trying to sell Endeavour Mining here. What's important is they did a great presentation. This is Mines and Money London from December of last year. And a lot of you probably have not seen this. There's a couple excellent slides for me to start answering my West Africa question. Let's get to the first slide. Love images like this. There's plenty of similar images from other presentations. So this red and green area going all the way from Niger over to Senegal and Mali and down to Ghana and Ivory Coast. This is the Birimian Greenstone Belt. I am not an expert, but I know enough to say that this is a underexplored part of the world. You have similar geology across all of these countries. You have plenty of opportunities for near-surface oxide gold, where drilling is relatively cheap, and there's potential to instantly find millions of ounces because places just haven't been drilled before. Part of that reason is because of tricky geopolitics, where you've had all sorts of issues, whether it's terrorism, whether it's, governments being overthrown, whether it's Ebola, and we hear the headlines, Africa's quote unquote a scary place. What's great is the geology doesn't change. It's great geology no matter what happens. But because of the geopolitical issues, you got to figure out which countries are getting better, which are getting worse. I will guarantee you these countries do not all act the same. And right now, there are some that are moving up and some that are moving down. If you can pick out the right ones, that intersection of geopolitics and geology, it's a great reason to look at this. Even better that there's so much focus on gold. And we'll talk a little bit more about this section and about gold in a minute. I love, just focus on the right side here. I love this little chart, gold production as a percentage of GDP. At the top here, West Africa, and we're kind of taking an average of countries, about 12%. That is huge. Look at the bottom, United States, 0.1%. I mean, drop in the bucket. Gold is important, but it just doesn't mean anything to the country. But even a mining-focused country like Australia, less than 1%. Now, granted, it would be great to see a mining production as a percentage of GDP, but let's just stick with gold for a second. What's important is, pretty much every West African country has a huge component where gold's important. They need foreign direct investment. They need, geologists and mining teams to come in, find, explore, develop, produce gold, and they want to treat them well. Now, of course, there's great examples of some countries doing a poor job of this, but because of all of the geopolitical issues in West African countries over the last few years, few decades, some of them really understand they need to get their acts together, and they'll make a lot of money this way. This is a great example where West Africa absolutely stands out from any other region in the world. And then I love these last two images. So we'll read the top here. Gold production is highly fragmented with limited consolidation amongst major miners. So this one's just great because you've got all these cool keywords in here of different mines. I wish I was aware of this when I first started doing research. If you're new, I highly recommend just type in all of these things for keywords. It's the same type of map as we saw before. And then on this other side, this is great indication West Africa is not consolidated yet. There's all these little players. There's lots of room for M&A activity, mergers and acquisitions. And to give you some recent examples, less than 2 months ago, Perseus Mining and Amara Mining announced a merger. They're in Ghana and Ivory Coast. Endeavour Mining announced an acquisition of True Gold for their Karma mine in Burkina Faso. Those are two big-time events, but they're just the tip of the iceberg. And just yesterday, from when this is being produced, commercial production was announced with Asanko Gold in Ghana, and stuff is happening. And you might be aware of that, but there's so much more, especially on the exploration side, which I don't want to get into, but that's kind of my bread and butter for interest. But from the small explorers all the way up to the senior producers, the interest is just starting, and I hope these are some good indicators of that. But we're going to move on to another example, another deck of slides, and this is from Goldfields, a larger company that has some mines in Ghana, but they're definitely interested in West Africa as well. This is from October 2015. We're going to look at some cool maps here. I really like this one. So you've got all these circles. These are showing districts and emerging districts. So like I mentioned before, Ghana and then the Senegal, Mali area, they're more developed, even though there's still exploration going on. And then you see these smaller sections, up here, this is Ivory Coast and Mali and Burkina Faso, and some other areas. And then you see some sections where you just see a couple dots. It really gives you an indication. There's so much neat stuff going on. And if you look into the details, you'll start to see, to understand, where are the most exciting areas. Another map, more great names, even showing you, what deposits have already been discovered. I mean, I love this stuff. This is great stuff for you to do research on your own. I'm not trying to tell you to buy anything without doing your own research. I'm just trying to be the messenger here. And then I really like this one as well with these notes, because Goldfields is making it clear that there have been multiple cycles where there's been some development, but it hasn't been fully developed yet. And they're even saying the Archean terrain, poorly explored. That's this whole red area. So that's adjacent to the Birmingham Greenstone belts. It's different geology, but they're saying there's more opportunities there. And there are some mines that have been discovered, but it enhances the whole West Africa area. So these are more things to look at on your own time. If you're still not convinced, I've got a couple other cool resources. So here's a silly site, King World News. Big on the hyperbole. I wouldn't trust everything they say, but whenever they interview Pierre Lassonde, I listen. So this says, legendary Pierre Lassonde says, super wealthy, now buying massive positions in the gold sector. So this was from November 2015. Let's go down to the one section that was especially interesting to us. This is what Pierre Lassonde said. A very wealthy African family just bought a 10% stake in a company, with more to come because the valuations are so absurd. And then he also says, these massive positions are being accumulated very quietly. This is all true, and I know who he's referring to. It's Teranga Gold in Senegal, and it's the Mimran family. David Mimran bought 10% of Teranga a few months ago, and that's exciting. A lot of people are totally unaware of that. When I read this, I also was aware that Naguib Sawiris, an Egyptian billionaire family, bought a roughly 30% stake in Endeavour Mining through a strategic investment. So you've got two billionaire African families buying stuff, and almost no one's talking about it. I mean, these are great signals, and Per is very respected in the industry, so it's great to hear that he understands what's going on as well. But to go a little further, this is really, for me, this is a kicker. If you want to do your own research, this is a great place to go. The Gold Report. I still follow them. They have releases every few weeks. But what I really find fascinating is that a few years ago there was so much stuff that focused on Africa. So this report's from 2014. This is another one, 2014, and these are all at the bottom, under the video on the CEO.ca article site. 2013, 2013, 2012. I recommend you check these all out. I found these a few years ago when I started getting interested in Africa, and I realized that there was a lot of interest in West Africa, believe it or not, especially if you're new to this. But it really died off starting in 2013 and leading in 2014. I think West African companies might have gotten the most hurt out of any region in the world, despite lots of neat discoveries being made. So in a lot of ways, that's still one of the most undervalued areas despite the potential. And this is a great way to pick up what people were saying, which probably is still true today, but nobody's writing these articles anymore. So I love finding stuff where it confirms that there's interest, but the interest isn't there right now, but it's very likely to come back. So I think this is a good place to stop. If you're on the CEO.ca site, I highly recommend you use that as a primary research tool. I love it. I'm making this partially for the CEO.ca crowd. You can search for all of these companies on there. I'm going to list a bunch of companies in the article, as well as there's country rooms in CEO.ca, which I like to add to, and a few other people do as well, to kind of follow the geopolitical side of whether countries are moving up and down on the scale. And just one other thing to add, a ton of these companies are not just listed on Canada, they're listed in Australia and London. Now, I will say that Australia is probably the most interesting to me because so many of the small explorers are on there. And London has some good companies, but just not as many of the small explorers. But do not discount all of the interest in Africa from the other exchanges. You can find a lot of opportunities that way as well. So I think that's it. Again, this is Nick, the Mining Book Guy. I appreciate you listening. I hope to see you on CEO.ca, and hopefully you get a little more interested in West Africa. Thanks. Bye.